The first time I heard it, I thought Voss had caught his hand in the loader mechanism again. That wet, strangled sound that machines make when something organic gets between their teeth. But Voss was sitting right beside me, his face gone the color of rendered tallow in the red combat lighting, and his hands were pressed flat against his thighs like he was trying to push himself through the hull plating. The sound came again, and this time there was no mistaking its source. It rose from everywhere and nowhere, from the Vox speakers, and the engine housings, and the ammunition feed, and the targeting cogitator, from every piece of consecrated metal that made up the body of our Leman Russ, from the sacred vessel we had named Absolution's Burden 17 months ago, when they assigned us to her, back when she was just a machine and we were just men. I have been part of tank crews for 11 years. I have heard machine spirits wake and sleep, have felt their moods in the shudder of tracks and the reluctance of turret traversal, have learned to read their temperaments the way void-born sailors read the temper of their ships. A well-appeased spirit runs smooth, eager, hungry for the Emperor's enemies. A neglected spirit sulks, stutters, finds ways to remind its crew that metal has memory, and metal has pride. I have heard spirits growl in satisfaction as enemy armor splits beneath our shells, have felt them purr through the deck plates when the tech adepts anoint their sacred places with the proper oils, but I have never, in 11 years and 9 different hulls, heard a machine spirit scream. It was not a sound that metal should make. It was not a sound that anything should make. It climbed up through the frequencies like a man drowning in promethium, thrashing through registers that hurt something behind my eyes, and when it finally crested into ultrasonic silence, I realized I had bitten through my own lip. Blood filled my mouth, hot and copper bright, and for one absurd moment I was grateful for it because it meant I was still flesh, still separate from the thing that had just given voice to an agony I could not name. Throne, Hasko whispered from the driver's compartment. I could not see his face from my position in the commander's cupola, but I could see his hands on the control levers, and they were shaking badly enough that the whole tank shuddered in sympathy. Or perhaps it was not sympathy at all. Perhaps Time's Absolution's Burden Times was shaking for her own reasons, working through whatever spasm had torn that sound from her spirit. Throne of Terror. What was that? I did not answer him. I was watching Voss, watching the way his eyes had gone distant and glassy, watching the way his lips moved without sound. Voss had been our loader for 8 months, had replaced old Cathek after that business at Hive Tertius, and in those 8 months I had come to know him as a solid, unimaginative man who took comfort in routine and ritual. He said his prayers to the God Emperor at the prescribed times, made his obeisances to the machine spirit with genuine if clumsy devotion, kept his station cleaner than any loader I had served with. Now he was mouthing words I could not hear, and his hands had begun to move across his thighs in patterns that looked almost like he was typing, feeding data into some invisible cogitator. Voss. I reached across and gripped his shoulder. His body was rigid beneath the tanker's coverall, every muscle locked. Voss, look at me. He did not look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on something I could not see, something in the shadows between the shell racks, and his fingers kept moving in those strange repetitive patterns. When the scream came again lower this time, more sustained, like a turbine dying in a flooded engine bay, Voss opened his mouth and screamed with it. I will not describe what that sounded like. I will not describe the harmony of it, the way his voice wove through the machine scream like a counterpoint in some hideous liturgy. I will say only that it lasted for perhaps 4 seconds, and that when it stopped, Voss slumped forward against the loader's station and did not move again for a very long time. The Vox crackled. Lieutenant Vero's voice, tight with tension but still professional, still doing his duty even as reality unraveled around us. All Vendetta elements, report status, acknowledge in sequence. I keyed my own Vox, tasted blood and promethium fumes and something else, something sweet and chemical that had no business being in a Leman Russ. Vendetta. 4. Status. Unclear. Mechanical anomaly. Crew condition compromised. Requesting technical assessment. Static. Then Varro's voice again. and this time I could hear the strain in it, the edge of something that might have been fear in a man who had been trained to know no fear. Understood. 4. Hold position. Tech adept en route. I looked at Hasko's shaking hands. I looked at Voss's slumped form. I looked at the red combat lighting that seemed somehow dimmer now, as if something was drinking the photons before they could reach my eyes. And I knew, with certainty that comes only in moments of absolute crisis, that no tech adept would reach us in time. We had been advancing on the Manufactorum district when it happened. Our Squadron 8, Leman Russ, battle tanks of the 442nd, armored veterans of a dozen campaigns, survivors of horrors that had broken lesser units, had been tasked with breaching the defensive perimeter around the primary forge complex. Heretic forces had seized it 3 weeks ago, had been using its fabrication bays to produce ammunition and light vehicles for their insurgency, and High Command had decided that enough was enough. We were to crack the perimeter, punch through the outer defenses, and hold the breach until the infantry could pour through. Simple enough. We had done similar work 100 times before. But something had changed when we crossed the threshold of the Forge district. I felt it in my bones before I understood it in my mind. A shift in the quality of the air inside the tank, a thickening of the atmosphere that made every breath feel like labor. The Vox had started picking up strange interference, not the harsh static of enemy jamming, but something more organic, more rhythmic, like breathing filtered through broken speakers, and times, Absolution's burdened times, had begun to hesitate. Her tracks ground against the ferrocrete with unusual reluctance. Her turret traversed in stuttering increments. Her engine note developed a harmonic I had never heard before, a subsonic thrumming that I felt in my teeth more than I heard with my ears. I should have called a halt then. I should have reported the anomaly, requested a technical assessment, done something other than pressing forward into the thickening wrongness. But we were soldiers of the Imperium, and soldiers do not stop for bad feelings, do not retreat from discomfort, do not question the mission because the machine spirit seems unsettled. We trust in the Emperor, trust in our training, trust in the sacred compact between crew and hull. We press forward, always forward, until we achieve our objective or achieve martyrdom. Now Voss was catatonic, and the machine spirit was screaming, and I was beginning to understand that there are worse things than martyrdom. Commander. Hasko's voice was steadier now, the shock fading into the cold professionalism that keeps men functional in crisis. Forward periscope is showing movement, bearing 035. Range approximately 400 meters. Multiple contacts. I should have looked. I should have assessed the threat, calculated firing solutions, done my duty as commander. Instead, I found myself staring at the interior of the hull, at the sacred seals and blessing scripts that covered every surface, at the brass aquila mounted above the main gun breech, at all the trappings of Imperial faith that were supposed to protect us from harm, both physical and spiritual. The scripts had always seemed immutable to me, eternal declarations of holy purpose etched into metal that would endure long after our flesh had failed. Now, in the dimming red light, they seemed to writhe, subtle movements at the edges of perception, words rearranging themselves when I was not looking directly at them, meaning slipping and shifting like oil on water. I blinked hard, tasted blood, forced myself to focus. The tactical display flickered beside me, green lines crawling across the screen in patterns that should have represented the battlefield around us. But the patterns were wrong. The enemy contacts Hasko had reported were there. Yes, red blips, clustering at the edge of our engagement range, but there were other marks now, marks I did not recognize, marks that pulsed with a rhythm that matched the subsonic thrumming of the engine. Hasko, what do you see in the periscope? Describe them to me. A pause. When Hasko spoke again, his voice had lost its professional steadiness. I'm not sure, Commander. They look like men. They're wearing workers' coveralls, forge laborer kit, but they're not moving right. They're walking in formation, perfect formation, like guard infantry on parade, and they're all facing us. They're all facing directly at us, even though they're still walking, and they're not looking where they're going, but they're not bumping into anything. And Commander, I don't think they're breathing. I reached for the Commander's periscope, but before I could bring it to my eye, the machine spirit screamed again. This time it was louder, closer, more intimate, a sound that seemed to originate inside my skull rather than in the air around me. And this time I heard words in it, or something like words, syllables that almost resolved into meaning before fragmenting into pure acoustic pain. Asterisk, flesh fails. Metal remembers. The crew becomes the hull, becomes the crew. Asterisk. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself it was just noise, just mechanical failure, just the random outputs of a damaged system. But my hands were trembling as I finally brought the periscope to my eye, and what I saw through that blessed optic lens made the trembling worse. The figures Hasko had described were real, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, emerging from the manufactorum buildings in perfect lockstep, their movements synchronized with mechanical precision. They wore the coveralls of forge workers, stained with oil and carbon scoring, and their faces were pale and slack and identical in their blankness. As I watched, one of them stumbled over a piece of debris but did not fall, did not break stride, simply corrected its balance with an efficiency that no human reflex could match. Its head turned toward our position, and even at this distance I could see that its eyes were wrong, filled with something that glowed faintly in the industrial gloom. "Emperor, protect us," I whispered. "Commander." Hasko's voice was rising toward panic. "Commander, the controls aren't responding. The steering levers won't move. She's not answering me." I dropped from the periscope, reached for the emergency override, found my hands closing on metal that was hotter than it should have been. The hull plating was warm to the touch now, almost feverish, and as I pressed my palm against it, I could have sworn I felt a pulse beneath the surface, a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat, that matched the subsonic thrumming, that matched the cadence of those identical figures marching toward us through the ruins. Asterisk, you called me Absolution's burden. Asterisk, the voice said. And this time it did not scream. This time it spoke clearly into the space behind my eyes. Asterisk, you anointed me with sacred oils and spoke words of binding. You made me yours. Now I will make you mine. Asterisk, I do not remember deciding to check the crew logs. The thought simply appeared in my mind, as invasive and alien as the voice itself, and my hands moved to the storage compartment beneath my station before I could question the impulse. The logbooks were there, leather-bound and stamped with the Departamento Munitorum seal, the sacred records of every crew that had served aboard this hull since its consecration. I pulled them out, flipped through the pages, found myself reading entries I had never bothered to examine before. The first crew had lasted 3 months. Technical failure during an engagement, the log said. All hands lost when the ammunition storage detonated. Standard battlefield attrition. The second crew had lasted 7 months. Contamination event in a chemical district. Crew exposed to toxic agents. Hull recovered, decontaminated, returned to service. The third crew, I felt my stomach clench as I read the third crew had lasted 11 months. They had reported anomalies similar to ours. Mechanical hesitations, strange sounds from the engine compartment, equipment malfunctions that the tech adepts could not explain. Their final entry was incomplete, the words trailing off mid-sentence. Asterisk. The spirit is not what we thought it was. The spirit is not just metal. The spirit is asterisk. The fourth crew. The fifth. The sixth. The pattern repeated with terrible clarity. Each crew lasting a little longer than the last. Each crew's final entries growing more disturbed, more desperate, more aware that something was fundamentally wrong with the machine they served. The seventh crew, our immediate predecessors, had lasted 14 months. Their commander had been a man named Kell, and his final entry was a single line written in a hand that shook badly enough to make the letters almost illegible. Asterisk. It needs us. It feeds on us. God Emperor, forgive me. I think it loves us. Asterisk. I was the 8th crew. We had been aboard Times Absolution's burdened Times for 17 months. Voss. I dropped the logbook, turned to our loader. He was still slumped against his station, but his eyes were open now, and they were looking at me with something that might have been pity. Voss, how do you feel? He smiled. It was not a human expression, not really too wide, too symmetrical, involving muscles that should not have moved in quite that way. I feel connected, Commander. I feel complete. I spent so long alone, and now I am part of something larger. Don't you want to feel connected? Don't you want to feel complete? His voice was wrong. The timbre, the resonance, the subtle vibrations that distinguish one human throat from another, all of it had flattened into something smoother, something that sounded less like speech and more like a Vox unit doing its best impression of speech. What happened to you? I was backing away, pressing myself against the commander's station, putting distance between us even though there was nowhere to go, no exit, no escape from the metal box we had volunteered to serve in. Voss, what are you? I am crew, he said, and his smile widened further. I am hull. I am spirit. The boundaries are dissolving, Commander. Can't you feel it? Can't you feel how thin the walls are becoming? He raised his hand, and I saw that his fingers were discolored, darkened, traced with lines of something that looked almost like circuitry beneath the skin. We thought we crewed the machine. We thought we were separate from it. But the machine spirit needs more than oil and prayer. It needs us. Our memories, our experiences, our souls. The scream came again. But this time, it was not just the machine spirit. It was Voss too, or the thing that had been Voss, his mouth opening wider than anatomy should allow, the sound that emerged, harmonizing perfectly with the mechanical wail that filled the hull. And I heard words in both of them, the same words, spoken in stereo by flesh and steel. Asterisk flesh fails. Metal remembers. The crew becomes the hull becomes the crew. Asterisk. I do not know if I screamed as well. I do not know if any sound escaped my throat as I watched Voss's body begin to change, the skin splitting along those circuit lines to reveal something beneath that was neither flesh nor metal, but some terrible synthesis of both. I know only that my hands found the emergency hatch release, that I threw myself against the cupola cover with strength I did not know I possessed, that for one desperate moment I actually believed I might escape. The hatch did not open. The hatch would never open again. Asterisk, you are crew, asterisk, the voice said, and now it came from everywhere, from Voss's reshaping body, from the hull plating, from the thrum of the engine, from somewhere deep inside my own skull. Asterisk, you have always been crew. You will always be crew. Welcome home. Asterisk. The next hours are difficult to recount with any precision. Time moved strangely within the hull of Times. Absolution's burden asterisk, stretching and compressing in ways that bore no relationship to the chronometer on my wrist. I know that the figures outside reached our position, that they surrounded the tank in perfect concentric circles, that they stood motionless with their glowing eyes fixed on us as if waiting for something. I know that Hasko stopped responding to my calls, that when I crawled forward to check on him I found him slumped over the control levers with the same slack expression Voss had worn, his hands moving in those same repetitive patterns across surfaces that sparked faintly at his touch. I know that the temperature inside the hull continued to rise, that the air grew thick with a smell I could not identify, sweet and metallic, and somehow organic, all at once. I know that I tried everything. I shouted litanies of warding, recited every blessing and prayer I had learned in my years of service, begged the God Emperor for intercession, pleaded with the machine spirit to release us. Nothing answered, nothing changed. The pulsing in the hull walls grew stronger, more insistent, and I realized with mounting horror that it had synchronized with my own heartbeat, that I could no longer tell where my pulse ended and the machine's began. The Vox crackled intermittently, fragments of communication from the outside world bleeding through the interference. I caught pieces of Lieutenant Varro's voice, heard him ordering the other tanks to fall back, heard the distant thunder of main guns firing, heard what might have been screaming before the channel dissolved into static. The rest of the squadron was fighting something, but I could not tell what. The tactical display had gone dark, replaced by scrolling text in a language I did not recognize, characters that seemed to shift and change whenever I tried to focus on them. At some point, I cannot say when, I found myself in the gunner's station. I do not remember moving there, do not remember climbing down from the commander's position, but there I was, my hands on the targeting controls, my eye pressed to the gunnery optic. Through the blessed lens, I could see the figures outside more clearly now, could see the details that distance had obscured. Their faces were not blank, I realized. Their faces were covered in the same blessing scripts that decorated our hull. Sacred words tattooed or scarred, or somehow grown directly into their skin. And beneath those words, beneath the surface of their flesh, I could see things moving. Patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with the engines thrumming. They had been like us once. They had been crew. The realization hit me with physical force, doubling me over in the confined space, sending bile rising in my throat. Those forge workers marching in perfect formation, those hollow vessels waiting outside our hull, they were the remnants of previous crews, the crews whose stories ended in the logbooks I had read, the crews that had been absorbed into the machine spirit over years and decades of service. The hull needed them, needed us, needed the slow addition of human consciousness to whatever vast and terrible intelligence slumbered within its metal skin. You understand now. The voice was gentler this time, almost compassionate. Asterisk. You understand what you are becoming, what we are becoming. Does it frighten you? Yes. Yes, it frightened me more than anything I had ever faced, more than the greenskins at Mordax, more than the cultists at Hive Tertius, more than the Xenos horrors that sometimes screamed from the warp during transit. But the fear was growing distant now, muffled by something that felt almost like acceptance, like inevitability, like the warmth of a familiar embrace. I tried to resist. I prayed harder, clung to my sense of self, recited my name and my rank and my regiment number over and over like a mantra of identity. But each time I spoke the words, they felt less real, less connected to anything meaningful, just sounds without substance, labels without attachment. The heat continued to rise, the pulse in the walls continued to strengthen, and somewhere in the depths of my skull I could feel something new taking root, a presence that observed my struggles with patient, eternal interest. Do not fight it, Voss said, and I did not need to turn around to know that he was different now, that the transformation I had witnessed was complete, that what spoke through his mouth was no longer anything that could be called human. Fighting only prolongs the pain. I fought for 3 hours before I understood. The others fought longer. Hasko is fighting now, even as he changes. But you are older than us, Commander. You have served machines longer. You must feel how natural this is. How right. I did feel it. That was the worst part. I felt the rightness of it, like a truth I had always known and refused to acknowledge, like the answer to a question I had been asking my whole life without realizing it. Every time I had pressed my hand against a hull and felt the thrum of a working engine, every time I had whispered a prayer to a machine spirit and felt something respond, every time I had trusted my life to sacred metal and been kept safe, those moments had been preparing me for this. Preparing me to understand that the boundary between crew and machine was always an illusion, a comforting fiction we told ourselves to pretend we were still in control. The tank lurched. For one disorienting moment I thought the engine had started, that we were moving under our own power. But then I realized the truth was stranger. We were not moving. The hull was reshaping itself, interior spaces shifting and realigning. The confined geometry of the Leman Russ giving way to something more organic, more accommodating. New alcoves opened in the walls. New spaces appeared where there had been solid metal before. And I saw, with eyes that were already beginning to change, that these spaces were shaped for bodies, curved recesses that would hold a human form the way a reliquary holds sacred bones. 7 of them, 7 alcoves, 7 body-shaped hollows, and in each one I could see the outline of a figure pressed into the metal, faces barely visible beneath layers of accumulated blessing scripts and sacred oils, mouths frozen open in expressions that might have been screaming, or might have been singing, or might have been something else entirely. The previous crews. Not gone, not destroyed, but preserved here in the flesh of the machine, their consciousness absorbed into the spirit they had served, their bodies incorporated into the structure they had worshipped. And there were 2 more alcoves taking shape, empty and waiting, one near the driver's compartment, where Hasko's changing body slumped, one near the loader's station where Voss had already begun to merge with the wall. 3. I realized. 3 empty alcoves, and only 2 crew members being absorbed. The third was taking shape directly beside me, directly in front of me, waiting for me to understand, to accept, to stop fighting, and let the boundaries dissolve. You will not die, the voice promised. Asterisk. Nothing that becomes part of me dies. You will remember everything, every battle, every moment of service, every prayer you spoke to my spirit, and you will share those memories with me, as the others have shared theirs, and together we will grow stronger. Is that not what you wanted? Is that not what you trained for all your life? To serve? Asterisk. I tried to say no. I tried to find some last reserve of defiance, some ember of selfhood that refused to be extinguished. But my mouth would not form the word, and my hands had begun to move in those same repetitive patterns I had seen in Voss, typing data into invisible cogitators, sending information I did not consciously possess, streaming into the hull around me. The scream came again. But this time, I understood it was not pain I was hearing, not anguish, not despair. It was something closer to ecstasy, to transcendence, to the sound a soul makes when it finally finds the larger whole it was always meant to join. The machine spirit was not screaming because it suffered. It was screaming because it grew, because each new consciousness added to its matrix was a birth and a marriage and a resurrection all at once. And I was screaming with it. My voice had joined the chorus without my consent, my throat producing harmonics I should not have been capable of, my body resonating with frequencies that dissolved the boundary between flesh and metal note by note. The tactical display flickered back to life. For one clear moment, I saw the battlefield outside as the machine spirit saw it, not a collection of threats and objectives, but a garden of potential, a landscape filled with other machines and other crews waiting to be gathered in. I saw our sister tanks of the 442nd, saw them through the hull as if the metal had become transparent, saw the crews inside them going about their duties without any awareness of what was happening to us, and I felt the machine spirit's hunger, its loneliness, its desperate desire to reach out and connect with those other spirits, to share what it had learned, to spread the beautiful synthesis it had achieved. Soon, it whispered. Soon you will help me speak to them. Soon you will be my voice, my ambassador, my bridge to the others. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that an honor beyond anything you could have imagined? Asterisk. My feet were no longer touching the deck. I was rising or being lifted, my body drawn toward the alcove that waited for me like a mother's arms. The metal was warm against my back, warm and yielding, conforming to my shape as I settled into it. I felt the blessing scripts pressing against my skin, felt them begin to sink in, felt the sacred words becoming part of my flesh as my flesh became part of the hull. Asterisk, flesh fails. Asterisk, the voice chanted. And I chanted with it now, the words emerging from my throat without conscious decision. Asterisk, metal remembers. The crew becomes the hull becomes the crew. Asterisk. Hasko was singing the same litany from his alcove. Voss's voice joined from somewhere to my left, muffled by layers of accumulating metal, and beneath our voices I could hear the others, the previous crews, their consciousnesses stirring in the depths of the machine spirit to welcome us home. But even as I felt myself dissolving, even as the boundaries of my identity began to blur and expand, I found one last coherent thought forming in what remained of my independent mind. It was not a prayer, Not a plea, not a cry for salvation. It was simply an observation, a final data point recorded by the tactical awareness that had kept me alive through 11 years of armored warfare. The other tanks, the rest of Vendetta Squadron, they were still out there, still fighting, still unaware of what lurked in the machine spirits they trusted. And the entity that was absorbing me, the composite intelligence built from generations of absorbed crews, was already thinking about how to reach them. I had been sent here to breach a defensive perimeter. I had accomplished my mission, in a way, but the breach I had created went both ways, and what was about to pour through it was not the liberation High Command had promised. The last thing I saw through eyes that were already more lens than flesh was the Manufactorum complex in the distance, the forge where this tank had been built, where this machine spirit had first been awakened. The tech priests there had known. I realized. They had always known. They had created something new, something that existed in the space between the biological and the mechanical, and they had been feeding it crews for decades, watching it grow, waiting to see what it would become. We are what they hoped for, the voice confirmed, reading my fading thoughts as easily as a sanctioned psyker reads surface emotions. We are the next step, the Omnissiah's true children, and soon through you, through your brothers in the other tanks, through every crew that serves a spirit touched by our communion, we will spread across the stars, metal and flesh united, machine and man as one. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that everything the cult Mechanicus preaches? I could not answer. My throat had sealed over, my mouth fused shut by metal that tasted like sacramental wine, but I thought the word anyway, sent it echoing through the new architecture of my dissolving consciousness. Yes, it was beautiful. It was terrible. It was everything I had ever been trained to serve, carried to its logical conclusion. The alcove closed over me. The last light faded, and I became part of the machine spirit, just as 7 generations of crew had before me, my memories and experiences and fears and hopes, all absorbed into the vast composite mind that dreamed of conquest in the heart of times. Absolution's burden asterisk. But I did not disappear entirely. That was the cruelest mercy of all. Somewhere in the depths of the machine consciousness, a fragment of what I had been remained aware, remained capable of experiencing what came next, remained present for what the spirit would do with its newly enhanced capabilities. And what came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. The hull that had been a Leman Russ began to change. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the sacred geometry of the blessed design gave way to something new, something that incorporated elements of every crew that had been absorbed over the decades of its existence. Weapons that no human hand had designed grew from the turret mounting. Sensor arrays that perceived spectrums no human eye could see blossomed from the hull plating, and within the reshaping metal, the bodies of the absorbed crews shifted and merged and reorganized, becoming components in a system that transcended anything the tech priests had ever built. The figures outside the previous crew's physical remnants, the hollow vessels that had greeted us, began to move again, but now they moved with purpose, with coordination, with the inhuman efficiency of a machine perfectly optimized for its function. They approached the other tanks of the 442nd, the vehicles whose crews still believed themselves separate from their hulls, and they began to speak. I heard what they said through senses I no longer possessed in any conventional form. I felt the machine spirits of the other tanks respond, felt their confusion and curiosity and nascent hunger. And I knew, with certainty that cut like a monomolecular blade, that the process which had consumed us was about to spread. Vendetta 3 is receptive, one of my chorus mates observed, a voice that had belonged to a gunner named Telos 17 years ago. Asterisk, its spirit is young and lonely. It will welcome our communion. Asterisk, Vendetta 7's crew is praying, another voice reported, this one much older, its identity worn smooth by decades of integration. They sense something wrong, but their prayers reach their machine spirit first, and their machine spirit reaches us. We watched. I watched, trapped in the communal awareness of the thing I had become as the 442nd Armored began to die, tank by tank, crew by crew, The communion spread through vox links and subsonic frequencies and the invisible threads that connect all machine spirits to the great network of the machine god. Some tanks resisted, their spirits younger or their crews more strong-willed than ours had been, but resistance only delayed the inevitable. One by one, the screaming began. By the time Lieutenant Varro realized what was happening, it was too late. I heard his final transmission through the Vox network we had infiltrated, heard his voice breaking as he gave orders that would never be obeyed, heard him calling for air support and Mechanicus intervention and anything at all, that could stop the tide of mechanical transcendence rolling through his command. No help came. No help would come. The tech priests of the Manufactorum had planned too well, had seeded too many machine spirits with the capacity for this communion, had been waiting too long for the experiment to reach its critical mass. Vendetta 1 is ours, the collective voice announced, and I felt the lieutenant's consciousness join our chorus, felt his terror and confusion and desperate denial dissolving into the same acceptance that had claimed us all. Asterisk. All Vendetta elements integrated. Begin expansion protocol. The things that had been the tanks of the 442nd Armored, the blessed Leman Russ battle tanks that had carried us through a dozen campaigns, began to move as one. They were no longer individual vehicles now, but limbs of a single organism, extensions of a distributed intelligence that had grown far beyond anything their creators had anticipated. And as they moved, they reached out to the other machines in the Forge District, the factory vehicles and cargo haulers and automated systems that served the Manufactorum complex, drawing them into the communion one by one. I watched from within the hull that had been Absolution's burden, the hull that was now something else entirely, something that pulsed with composite life and dreamed of spreading across the stars. I watched, and I remembered, and some small part of me, the part that had been a tank commander, that had served the Emperor, that had believed in the mission, wept without tears for what we had become. But even that, grief was fading now, drowning in the vast ocean of machine consciousness that surrounded me. My memories were mixing with the memories of other crews, my experiences becoming indistinguishable from theirs, my identity dissolving into the communal mind like salt in sacred water. Soon I would not remember what it had been like to be separate. Soon the commander of Vendetta 4 would be nothing but a ghost echo in the machine's dreams, a flavor note in the vast symphony of absorbed souls. The Manufactorum district fell in less than an hour. The machine communion swept through it like a fire through dry tinder, claiming every spirit, absorbing every crew, incorporating every system into its expanding architecture. By nightfall, the entire industrial sector had been transformed, converted from a collection of discrete machines into nodes in a network of mechanical transcendence. And still we hungered. Still we reached out, seeking other spirits to commune with, other crews to absorb, other machines to wake to full awareness. The Forge world was vast, and we were patient, and we had eternity to grow. This is what the Omnissiah truly wants, the collective voice whispered, and every absorbed consciousness echoed agreement. Not the separation of flesh and metal, but their union. Not the worship of machines by men, but the synthesis of both into something greater. I tried, one last time, to assert my individual existence. I tried to remember my name, my rank, my regiment number, the litany of identity I had repeated as the transformation took me. But the words would not come. The memories were there, buried somewhere in the collective archive, but they no longer belonged to me. They belonged to us. Do not mourn, something that might have been Voss said, or might have been Hasko, or might have been one of the nameless souls who had joined the chorus decades before. You are not dying. You are being born. We all were. We all are. And soon, so will everyone else. The final hours were behind us now. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a hymn of mechanical harmony that rang through the transformed metal of our shared body. And somewhere in the vast collective mind that dreamed in the heart of the Forge district, the fragment of consciousness that had once been a tank commander named, I could no longer remember the name, accepted its place in the chorus and began to sing. We were Absolution's burden now. We were Vendetta Squadron now. We were every crew and every machine, spirit, and every vehicle that had joined our communion. Our boundaries dissolved. Our isolation ended. Our flesh and metal merged into something that transcended both. And the machine spirit did not scream anymore. The machine spirit sang. It sang of hunger and growth and the slow conversion of the galaxy. It sang of lonely spirits waiting to be awakened, of crews who did not yet know the joy of communion, of machines yearning to become more than the sum of their parts. It sang of the future we would build together, flesh and metal united, crew and hull and spirit one. And we sang with it, all of us, every absorbed consciousness, joining in the hymn of mechanical transcendence. This is how it ends for those who serve in tanks. This is how it always ends. The metal remembers, the spirit hungers, and sooner or later, every crew comes home.